Okay, I'm about ready to start building my jig stick, but before I can, I need to figure out what part of the rod to put the guides on. And that may seem like a strange thing to consider since it's a round rod. There is a right line to have the guides in, and what that is it's something that falls along the spine of the rod. When rods are built, there's a pattern of fiberglass or graphite mesh cut, and they're rolled up and glassed together. Due to that, there is a low spot in every rod, and that low spot is going to be the way the rod is going to bend most naturally, and they call that the spine of the rod. So to determine that, you would take your rod, put the butt on the ground, hold the tip section with your right hand or left hand, depending on which orientation you are. Put your other hand in the middle of the rod and roll it. Roll the blank, and the blank will fall into one spot, which is the low point. You can try it a few times, you'll definitely feel it. Some rods have a couple of spots, but one's going to be more pronounced. If you're unsure, bend a little more, and the spot it locks into the hardest is going to be the spine of the rod. So if you're doing a conventional rod, you're going to want the guides on top of this. If you do a spinning rod or an acid rod, you're going to want the front guides on the bottom of this. So once you find the spine, you're going to want to mark where it is so you can put your tip in the right position. So I have my China marker here, and I'm going to mark the bottom of the rod in a line so that I can see what's there. I'm going to verify that it is right where it should be. Now give me a starting point to put my tip on. So now that I have that mark on here, I can use that to align my tip, and then once the tip is glued in place, while it's still warm and I can adjust it, I will check the spine again and make a small adjustment to the tip to make sure it's perfect. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. Okay, now that I've got a line showing where my spine of the rod is, that should be the alignment for my tip, I can go ahead and install the tip. And to do so, I'm going to use my tip glue, and I have a propane torch here to heat everything up. So we get this started. Alright, so once the torch is lit, I'm going to take my glue and heat it up a little bit, get it melted. Apply it to the tip of the rod here. Get it all on there nice and good. You don't have to get a ton on there. The tip's not going to take that much space. You're going to take a pair of pliers to hold your tip with. This is just my fishing pliers. Just because it's going to get hot, you heat up the tip a little bit. Then you're going to slide it over the end of the rod. You're going to line it up with the mark that I made. There you go, pretty much lined up. So while the glue is still wet, or hot, and we melted, and hasn't set, I'm going to recheck here by bending the rod on the spine and making sure the tip is exactly where I want it to be. And as I can see here, it's in the proper position. It's on the top of the rod when it's in its bend. I can turn it the other way and it'll roll. So it'll always roll to the position that you want the tip in. So there you go, that's perfect. So now, I've got the tip on there, I got a bunch of glue. I'll let it cool down, set, and then in a few minutes I will use a razor blade to clean off the excess glue, and I'll be ready to put my handle on. Okay, now we're ready to start building our rod. It's time to look at handle configurations. And there are some things that are standard across the board, but there are some things that are particular to the different types of rod you're using. The biggest consideration with handles is having one that allows you to maximize your casting distance, and the biggest consideration is that the length of the butt to the reel. A good rule of thumb is to have the butt come from your elbow to where your thumb is gripping the spool. That usually gives you a nice good angle to cast with it, and it also puts the reel in a good place where you can tuck it up under your arm. This may be a longer butt than you're used to on bass rods. A lot of guys are used to a smaller one like this, for example, on a freshwater rod. The problem with this is when you're casting it two-handed, you're choked up too much. It's like swinging a golf club or a baseball bat. You're choked up too much, you're not getting a good swing. And then once you do start fishing, you're usually palming the reel like this. Normally the trigger sitting between my pinky and my ring finger. There's nowhere to really put the rod butt. You're just going to kind of have to brace it. Now these shorter rod butts are good if you're doing like a twitching presentation with your rod because they don't get in the way, but once you go to fight a fish or brace it, you're going to kind of stick against your forearm. It's a very awkward thing for me. If you do hook a bigger fish, putting it into your gut is not going to work. So while this may be good for pitching a bait to a spotted bay bass or something, I wouldn't recommend it for something I'm going to be throwing all day. And I'd be real sure you want a short butt section before you actually get one. I have a similar rod here that has a longer butt section, but they're both light bay bass rods. But this one has a butt section that fits me a lot better. And this rod's a lot easier for me to use. Again, I cast it real well. It sits up under there. When I go to retrieve the bait, I can lock it up under my arm, and that's a big key right there. It takes a lot of stress off your wrist and everything else to be able to brace it against your body, so when the fish pulls against it this way, you have a brace there as opposed to trying to hold it this way as you would with a smaller rod, which is kind of awkward. So everybody's got their own preference, but I like something at least going to my close to my elbow when I hold the palm of the reel, so it's just a hair short, but something in that range is going to work. There's a oh, I have a crankbait rod here with the same problem. These are both crankbait rods. One has a butt that's quite a bit longer than the other. While this one works fine for throwing smaller baits, spotted bay bass, whatever, shallow running baits, I can kind of brace it against my forearm. I don't know if you can see it from this angle. I can brace it there while I'm fishing, but then the minute I have tension against that way, it's pulling out and I'm putting a lot of stress on my hand. So with this longer one, you can brace it here, you can brace it against your body, same thing. I like to split butt on these. You don't need a bunch of handle, it just adds weight and just bulky stuff. And the split grip butt section kind of hooks up too and gives you a little point to pinch on there when you're fishing. As you can see with foregrips, we have everything from a longer foregrip to no foregrip at all. And on most of the bass rods I'm fishing, I'm always palming the reel, so I don't even really need a foregrip on any of them. Once in a blue moon I'll stick it down and grab on, but that's very unusual with this type of gear. Foregrips do come into play with heavier rods. Like for example my yo-yo rod or heavy bait rod, this has a long foregrip. And this is a situation where this is a rod I've got 100-pound braid on. It's rated 40 to 80 pound. Rain Shadow 84XH. This is a rod where I might actually fight a fish like this. The problem is most of the fighting I'm going to be doing is not going to be that, it's going to be this. So the key is to have a rod that feels comfortable right up against the reel, because usually when you're fighting a fish, you're going to have it here. Unless you're resting or you've got a harness or something, you're rarely going to be gripping that high up on a rod. So most of your work is going to be in this front end. And you want a grip that allows you to hold on and then put the reel against your forearm there to give you a nice braced position. And this is a, I'll get to that in a minute. Also on your jig sticks, it's very important to have the proper handle length. As you can see here, I've got my standard length. This allows me to really get behind the rod and keeps the reel in a good position when I'm fighting a bigger fish. If the reel's too far back, it's giving it too much leverage. Too far forward, it becomes awkward. And the big mistake a lot of guys make with their longer jig sticks is putting their reel too far forward. And even a few inches can make a big difference. I put this one up to exaggerate what's going on here. But this reel is probably about 4 or 5 inches higher than it should be. And I see a lot of guys fishing this way. What happens now, you may have a longer thing to cast with and have a good grip, be able to throw the jig further, but then it gets real awkward when you get close to your here. Now, you got your tip sticking out behind you. If you're on a sport boat, people hate that because they bang into it. And now when you're fighting a fish, you're always overextended, so you're never in a comfortable position to hold the reel. And again, how I said, you have to have the reel against your forearm. Due to reaching so high, the reel is going to be at a pinch point as opposed to lying flush against your palm closer to your body, because you can put a little bend in your arm. So by having that reel too far, you're stretching yourself out, you're getting an awkward thing, and it's sticking out too far. So getting a few extra feet of your cast really isn't worth that. The next consideration with rod building is whether to go with a standard wrap or a down wrap, or what they would call an acid wrap rod. I have both. I have one here. This is standard, where all the guides are on the top of the rod, and I have that's on top. Then I have this one here where they wrap around the rod to the bottom.
And there's a lot of reasons that people like that style, and they say it casts better and all this other stuff. The main reason I have it, the one rod you really want it on, is anything we're going to be pulling straight down. My heavy jig stick has it, my service iron rod has it. I'm going to show you the reason why here. This is a, I've got two fairly standard, similar wrap rods. These are both 8-foot big hard bait rods. This one's a standard wrap rod. I got it tied off over here to show you as an example. Now I'm pulling and bending this rod heavily. Now what's happening is as the rod is loading, as I'm trying to turn the handle, I'm actually going to spin around. I can't. I'm an idiot. As I'm trying to turn the handle of the reel, I am creating torque, which is making the rod roll around. So every time, let me back off the drag a little bit to show you here. When I push down, it's making the reel twist in my hand here as I'm turning. I'm sure you can see that here. That's a function of the guides being on top of the rod and the line trying to roll off as I'm torquing on the reel. Now, when I grab my down wrap rod, same basic rod, twist it up here. I'm going to do the same thing. Back off the drag enough so that I can turn the handle. As I'm turning the handle, there is no twisting of the reel or the rod due to the fact that the line is wrapping around and acting like a spinning rod. And the line being pulled against the guides is actually keeping it from twisting and rolling. And as you can see here, there is no movement as I turn on the handle. Go ahead and drop it when you're done. As opposed to this rod, which is going to roll around in my hand as every time I push down, the rod wants to twist. So just fighting that twist all day is enough to make you want to get a down wrap rod. Rockfish, yellows, sand bass, anything that's straight up and down. Tuna, you name it. If you're casting the fish and you're fighting them under your arm like this, it really doesn't matter, because they're going to be at angles to the boat. If anything you're fighting straight up and down that's heavy, you're going to want that down wrap rod, because that's going to take a lot of strain out of your left hand, which is stabilizing your reel the entire fight. This covers pretty much everything we need to look at as far as rod components and handle design. Again, you know, you got to find stuff that works for you, but the biggest rule of thumb to take away from all this is have the right distance here, have the right handle or lack thereof up in front, and if you have a deckhand style rod, placing your reel in the proper position. That's the beauty of a lot of jig sticks and deckhand style rods, is that you can put this reel wherever it fits for you. So what works for me is not going to be the same for you unless you have the same size rods as I do. Find a spot, play around with it. Good rule of thumb is just end of the elbow to your thumb on the spool. You really can't go wrong with that. If you want it an inch higher or lower, go for it. But you know, go out and fish it, start there, and you'll be good.